Connecticut, the Merritt Parkway was a lovely tree-lined, four-lane divided highway that ran from the border of New York through New Haven County, through Fairfield counties, and it really was quite an attractive roadway through a very expensive bit of real estate in Fairfield County. The very wide meridian, the grassy area between the lanes, was planted with flowering trees, dogwoods and redbuds, and every spring my grandmother, Grammy, my father's mother, loved to go for a ride along the Merritt Parkway to see the flowering trees. In 1968, I was inducted into the Army in New Haven, and on the bus ride from New Haven to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I had basic training, we did not take the Merritt Parkway. There's no buses or commercial traffic or motorcycles or trucks allowed on the Merritt Parkway. But I arrived at basic training in Fort Dix, and I have to tell you that I was not really good military fodder. My entire life I've had this thing about pushing back against authority and being somewhat impulsive. Pushing against authority and being impulsive about it are not attributes universally admired in the military setting, and it caused me some problems. So soon after I got off the bus, I realized the military was not for me, but there I was signed up, and I was going to stay. After basic training at Fort Dix, 8 weeks, I was sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana for advanced infantry training. My MOS, as people allude to, was 11 Bravo infantry. And then after that training, I had a 30-day leave and I was sent to Vietnam. Now, when I first got to Vietnam, they didn't assign us to units right away. It took a while. And I think what they were doing is just allowing us to get acclimated to the climate there. Now, I had spent the better part of July and August in Louisiana, and I thought I knew something about heat and humidity. But Vietnam brought it to a whole another level. It was blazing hot and sauna humid. And I got off the Freedom Bird, the plane that brings you to Vietnam. It's a nice air-conditioned plane, 707, and you get off and you get on the stairway to step down, and you hit something. It's the atmosphere. And your crisp fatigues, which are starch, wilt before you've taken a step. So it's incredibly hot and humid, and the atmosphere is a physical presence that you have to force your way through. So we didn't get assigned to a unit right away. You're getting issued a weapon and other supplies and things. And it's typical Army stuff. You're being marched from one place to another place. They're making you do double time and running places. And you get there and you have to wait an hour for it to start. And there was one orientation session I attended that taught me a lot about what I call the big lie. And I need to define the term the big lie. For me, the big lie is a statement, a notion that is obviously or demonstrably false, and yet somehow a lot of people believe it. Now, given that definition, I'm sure many of you are saying, well, I don't believe anything that's obviously false or patently ridiculous and provably wrong, and yet we all know people who do, don't we? We all know someone, but none of us are that person. Now, I'll give you an example of what might be considered a big lie. I want you to imagine, in your mind, imagine an Arctic landscape. You got that? Okay. Now, I want you to consider the length of the growing season in the Arctic. Okay. Now I want you to consider the location and the name of Greenland. Greenland. Big lie. And yet, how many of us have ever even questioned that? And that's what a big lie is. It's sort of, they're immune to scrutiny. And they're just out there, and people don't examine them. So we got into this tent, back to Vietnam, we've been in the Arctic, much hotter. Got into this tent, about 100 of us, and they have all these folding chairs opened up for us, and we're sitting down, and there's a raised platform at the front of the tent. The sides are rolled up, which was air conditioning of a sort in Vietnam, hoping for a breeze. And at the front, on the platform, there was a full bird colonel, and he's pacing back and forth, and we sat ourselves, and he welcomes us to Vietnam, like we were tourists. And then he says, I know some of you are worried about going home in one piece. Well, that got my attention because I had some concerns about my physical well-being over the next 12 months. And then he said something remarkable. None of you boys have to worry about that because you are safer here in Vietnam than you are at home. Interesting thought. He's got my attention now. Now, I'm in like the third row, and he explained his position. He said, you're safer here because in America, every year, 50,000 people die in highway accidents, traffic accidents on America's highways. And in Vietnam, we only have about 5,000 combat deaths a year, American combat deaths a year. We don't even count the other guys. And he said only. So, did I mention I was somewhat impulsive and pushed back here? I did? Okay, good. I just couldn't help myself. I mean, before I knew it, I was standing up with my hand raised saying, sir! Excuse me, sir! He said, yes, soldier, what is it? I said, with all due respect, I said, that can't be right. I mean, there's what, 200 million people in America? And we have 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam? 50,000 of 200 million is a much smaller percentage than 5,000 is of 50,000. He was not pleased. His eyes narrowed. He just bore down and stared at me, and there was a vein pulsating on his head. And he looked at me and he said, soldier, percentage, cementage. When you're dead, you're dead. Well, I couldn't argue with that. And he was really angry, but what surprised me was how angry my fellow GIs were. The guys I was with, they were furious at me. They were yelling at me, telling me to shut up and to sit down, and the colonel was angry at me, and did I mention I was somewhat impulsive? Okay, good. This just came out of my mouth. I'm still standing, my face is all red, I'm still standing there. I'll tell you what, sir. I'm no coward, and I volunteer for hazardous duty along the Merritt Parkway, and I am willing to go right now. My request for reassignment was rather rudely denied, which was, I expected that, but what I didn't expect was how angry my fellow GIs were, how angry these guys were, and they were furious with me. And then I realized they wanted to believe they were safer. They wanted to believe they were safer. And I was challenged. That very comforting, but very wrong notion. And that's how beguiling the big lie is. Because it appeals to our preferences. The big lie, they are always more preferable to our complicated and sometimes risky